Well, thank you all for joining us this morning for the second panel. As everyone, I'm sure, is well aware, U.S. manufacturing played a really significant role in the U.S. Presidential election and is very important to the current administration. A lot of Trump's support came from a lot of the former manufacturing hubs in the Midwest, and workers who saw their jobs disappear over the last few decades. And many have been struggling to find new careers, to find jobs that pay as well as they used to. Right now it just seems like people have been really struggling to find a solution on how to address kind of like the shifting landscape of manufacturing. And, past administrations have, put a lot of money towards job training and apprenticeships. The current administration wants to work on some of the federal apprenticeship programs. The president has also been using public relations, publicly pressuring companies to not move manufacturing abroad. And so we kind of think, what does this all mean for U.S. manufacturing? Well, today we're going to talk a bit about the challenges facing the sector, what the federal government can or cannot do related to boosting manufacturing, and kind of taking a look at whether or not it's even possible for the sector to kind of be revived in the way it was in the 1970s. So on that note, I'm going to introduce our panelists. I have here Mark Murrow, Senior Fellow at the Metropolitan Policy Program here at Brookings. And I have John Hazen White, Jr., who is the Executive Chairman of Tako Group Holdings in Rhode Island, a leading manufacturer of heating and cooling equipment.
Actually, we call it Tako.
Oh, Tako.
But we really don't care what you call it.
Okay, good.
As long as you
Tako.
buy it.
So I should have. Here I am asking how to pronounce everyone's name, and I didn't even think to ask how to pronounce the name of the company.
No offense.
Okay, so Tako Group Holdings in Rhode Island. And then we have Congressman David Cicilline, who's a Democrat representing Rhode Island's 1st District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So first, I kind of want to focus on the big picture. And Mark Murrow, my first question is for you. What is the state of U.S. manufacturing today? There's been a lot of talk about, it's suffering. We need to do a lot to fix it. But I don't think that tells the whole story. So maybe you can kind of tell us what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Great to be here. So I do think President Trump deserves a huge amount of credit for stressing the importance of and placing manufacturing revival at the center of the narrative of winning again. This is really important, and manufacturing really does matter for lots of reasons, and not just the jobs of working people, but this is something like 60 to 70% of our export base, and it's a huge center, not that known, of our innovation investments. Something like 90% of private sector innovation and R&D is in the manufacturing sector, so it matters hugely. How's it doing? I've been a big optimist about it and sort of argued consistently about its importance since the crisis. I have to say, I'm concerned right now about the direction of the U.S. sector. It's not doing that great. We could look at employment, and I'll say a few things about that since the crisis, but we also need to think about basic productivity and output, which have been sort of cresting or plateauing a bit. So let's just talk employment since the crisis. We had a pretty good surge, recapturing some of the horrific losses of the crisis, especially through the first 3 years or so of the recovery. Since then, auto has continued to surge and now is beginning to plateau, but the rest of the sector has been flattening a bit. Output has continued to drift upward, but not as impressively as it had been. And employment has been really quite flat now for 4 years. So I've been more concerned, and I think the auto boom has somewhat obscured broader questions about the overall competitiveness of the, and certainly employment. We can talk about that. So what is wrong here, if anything? I mean, I think on employment, it's being depressed by automation. I think that's part of the picture, not the whole picture, and automation is very much part of competitiveness, but it does mitigate against big expectations for a massive employment. So that shouldn't be the hope, I think. I think we should hope to see the steady creation of good jobs over time, increasing productivity, increasing output. And some of that's in question. Trade globalization, clearly an issue. We'll talk about that more, including the next panel. But I think Trump deserves credit for talking about, especially some of the consequences of normalized trade with China in the 2000s. But I think there are deeper competitive problems that are absolutely not being discussed much right now, certainly by Trump right now. Few just factoids. Only some of the really important advanced manufacturing sectors, auto, aerospace, pharma, machinery, and chemical can be said to be vibrant. We have a lot of sort of, I think, zombie sections of the manufacturing economy.
Like which one?
Just a number of just generic kind of, wholesale, kind of commodity production that are half of large U.S. metros saw losses in the last 2.5 years. I think that's troubling. And then productivity and output, as I said, have been flattening. So a few issues there. I just want to highlight right off, though, some of the key issues. I think, to me, the things that matter are innovation and technology, diffusion, how well we're coming up with great ideas, but how well they're flowing through the overall manufacturing sector into, not just the leading firms in each area, like John's company, but through other companies. Other nations are pushing harder on tech development and diffusion, I think, than this country. There really are skills gaps and workforce issues. We heard about that in the first panel a bit, as the sector strains to secure a younger, techier workforce to fill in and substitute for the retiring generation. And then I think we have a lot of kind of thin regional clusters where they don't have everything that they need. You can't supply as much. There's a thin workforce in a lot of, so this spatially in geography, we have, places that are kind of, patchy manufacturing sectors. So against this backdrop, I think we need to be thinking, yes, about trade, automation, it's unclear what we do about it, and it's important that we be a high-tech manufacturing sector. So, we could talk about what automation means, but I do think we need to be thinking about things like building the innovation capacity and thinking about how technology is shared among firms, skills, and these regional areas. So in that sense, I'm concerned about cuts to the federal R&D budget and technology sharing and diffusion. It is a concern that we have major cuts coming at the workforce system. I think it is welcome. I think the apprenticeship initiative, though, from the Trump administration is incredibly important. And then we've got to be thinking about how are we helping states and regions and networks of companies build their regional capacity. Because you have a national economy, but you also really, manufacturing especially is a place-based activity. How well is Cranston doing? How well is Wichita doing? And those things really matter. So I'm just going to leave it there. I will just say I am dubious of promises to bring back millions of jobs. I think that is not going to happen. But let's see if we can think about how to make America a little bit greater than it is in manufacturing right now. So.
Well, you did mention your concern about cuts to federal programs that are kind of designed to boost the sector, which leads me to my second question for Congressman Cicilline. What is the role of the federal government in boosting manufacturing? I kind of wonder, should the government have a role, and if so, how effective can the government be in even doing anything to change the issues?
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to the White family and for Brookings for convening this conversation. Rhode Island, of course, is the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, so we have a very special role in the manufacturing history of our country. And I think the government has an important role. First and foremost, recognizing that having a robust manufacturing sector matters to the country, not only because manufacturing jobs pay on average more than non-manufacturing jobs. So these are good paying jobs, but also because having a manufacturing sector is very important to our national security and our capacity to prepare for the challenges we face in the 21st century. So it's really important that we make things and that we have a strong manufacturing sector. I think the federal government has a role to play. And while I think President Trump has been referenced already in our panel for sort of talking about the importance of the issues, I think when you look at the conduct of the administration and the conduct of the federal government, that's when we have to really kind of tease out, is it really helping to grow manufacturing? First, we should, as a national government, have a national manufacturing policy and strategy. There's been a piece of legislation introduced for a number of years really to coordinate the development of a comprehensive manufacturing strategy for our country so that we're doing this in a thoughtful way. The second thing is, and I thought Mark was going to reference the Manufacturing Communities Partnership, making sure that there are regional ways for the ecosystems that are necessary to support manufacturing are developed. I introduced a piece of legislation to do that I hope will move this year, and that's really to help the public and private sector build partnerships to really strengthen the ecosystems that we need for manufacturing. Third, the federal government has to play a role in really investing in workforce training and skills development. This continues to be a challenge. I talk to manufacturers all the time, visit manufacturing facilities who say, I have a position, I just don't have someone with those skills. And that means not just focusing on, as part of our agenda, four-year college, but career paths and technical schools and community colleges that are geared to jobs that are actually available in manufacturing and creating manufacturing pathways and recognizing that manufacturing is an honorable profession, and that if your kid comes home and says, I want to be a manufacturer, that parents don't recoil and think, great, making things is a good thing. It's a good job. It's an honest living. You can make stuff. And I think the maker movement is helping to change some of the cultural stigma that attached for a long time to manufacturing that we've got to change. So I think the government can play a role in that. And then finally, I think that we have an important responsibility to support the kind of Buy American provisions for the federal government. We spend a lot of money. We ought to be cultivating American manufacturers and supporting them by using our purchasing power as a government. I think it's quite different for the private sector, but for the government, we ought to be supporting American jobs by, and I'm working on some legislation with Senator Murphy to modernize our Buy American provisions, which lots of companies get around, or lots of federal government gets around very often, and the idea that we're not using American taxpayer money to support American businesses and American manufacturers, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think there are very specific things we can do. But the last thing I want to mention is what Mark mentioned at the beginning is I do also think we've got to figure out how we begin to respond to this very serious challenge of automation. I say challenge because it's great and it's important, but if you look at it over the last 25 years, manufacturing has gone up and manufacturing jobs have declined. That's in large part because we know how to make things faster and more efficiently and with less people. And while that's good for output, where this automation challenge is really a problem with respect to jobs. And so figuring out a real strategy about how we anticipate over the next decade what the impact of automation will be on job loss and what that means in terms of our responsibilities as a country, I think is a really critical responsibility.
Right, and when you mentioned jobs and kind of like the skills gap, it's a really good segue to my question for Mr. White. There has been a lot of talk about the skills gap. Employers are saying we just can't find people with the skills we need to function in this high-tech manufacturing field today. I mean, what have you seen as as the head of a manufacturing business? What is the workforce really not as prepared, and why are they not prepared?
So first, I just would like to reach out to you, David, on the Buy America Act. I hope that as you pursue that, you involve people like me, because it's a very difficult program. I hope you involve people like myself, because it's a very difficult arena to play in.
But it's not actually for private businesses. It's for when the government makes a purchase to buy
But we are-
Tako products, for
but-
example.
But manufacturers like myself are held to a certain standard with Buy America, which is difficult to meet. Okay. So I hope you.
Yeah, of
that's
course.
all I'm reaching out. On the skills gap, what was the question again?
So my question is, how have you noticed that, because I know you do a lot of workforce training, a lot of education within the company, and I'm wondering, is it really as severe of a problem as people make it sound? Like, are you looking for people for jobs and they just don't have the skills that you need?
Okay, yes, so one of the big problems that we're all confronted with, I don't think it's just manufacturing, but is this baby boomer bust, or whatever you want to call it, right? I mean, they're all leaving all of a sudden because they're all at retirement age. And so I didn't see this one coming. So we have, when I began running this business in 1992, we were about $30 million in sales, and we had 500 people. Now we're going to be bumping 300 million, we have 500 people. And the good news is they're the same 500 people. The bad news is I didn't see this baby boomer bust thing coming, right? When we would lose these folks. Our attitude at Tako for the last 25 years has been that we have the best workforce I have ever seen anywhere in the world. And if they're not up to speed on any particular thing, then my attitude has been train them. You know, the one asset that all companies like Tako have that is absolutely not going to become obsolete the moment it's the sun comes up is the people. And people want to learn and grow and develop. So, yeah, there's a skills gap, of course, because to the point about automation and whatnot, you know, we haven't lost jobs because we don't have jobs to fill. We've lost jobs because we've increased productivity. About that simple. So people want to become a part of that train ride, I think. And so I think for companies like mine to provide the opportunity for people to grow and develop, part of running a company like this, and I'm going to touch on part of running a company like Tako, I think, is to consider it a bit of a social responsibility. You know, we have Tako globally now has a little over 1,000 people. Well, imagine the impact doing the right things and providing these jobs can have on not only those 1,000 people, but their families and the suppliers and the customers. I mean, we've become a part of the infrastructure of the world, and every manufacturer has that ability. So I think to train and provide is incumbent upon us. I think I talked last year on the same panel about a company I read about up in, I don't remember, Wisconsin or somewhere up in that part of the country. And there was a company in a town that employed 2,000 people that made parts for the auto industry. And this baby boomer thing began to happen. And people were retiring and people were leaving. They couldn't replace them because the parents of the kids in the schools were saying, no, you're not going into manufacturing. That's dark, it's dirty, you're going to go to college, you're going to get an English degree. That's what I did. You're going to get an English degree or you're going to get an art degree, and by golly, you know. So the school, the company went to the town and worked with the city and came up with a plan to bring high school kids into the factory. At which point these kids saw what looked like a big video game because of the automation and the robotics. Pretty cool stuff. My company's the same way. So they went home and told their parents, we need to go together. And they brought all of the families in. And then the company said to the families, now look, if, you know, Louis is going to go to Harvard, okay, good. But for the rest of these kids, they don't all want to go to college. And here's what we offer forth. We will pay them, $60,000, $70,000 a year to come work here, learn, train, apprenticeships, whatever they're going to do. And oh, by the way, we'll educate them. So what a win-win this was, and that saved the company, because that company was buttoned up and moving to Mexico. And as a result of this, and I want to lead that program in Rhode Island. I so badly want to lead that same program, because we're up against the same scenario. So I guess circling back to your question about a skilled or unskilled workforce, I just think it's incumbent upon us to train people and to offer the ability. They will take that chance to learn, right? People want to learn.
And I think it's true that historically the attitude of a lot of manufacturers are, we can't find people, government's doing a bad job of training them, and therefore we have a skill gap. And you're sort of articulating a different path. That's first, we're going to keep moving up the productivity curve, and we're going to do cool things that are attractive, but we're going to invest in younger workers to help them.
In the last
stay with you.
in the last panel, they were talking about automation and advanced manufacturing.
Yeah.
Well, advanced manufacturing or not, I mean, I don't think you'd consider Tako an advanced manufacturing company. We're not making solar panels or electric cars, or computers. But if you haven't kept up to date in any kind of manufacturing, then you're not here, right? So I think advancing and improving technology is absolutely a reality.
Just quick note, you are, in our classification at Brookings, you are advanced.
Wow, really?
And
Thank you.
And
Dustin
Dustin
just went
out
up.
here on my team just ran the calculation. So 3/4 of American manufacturing companies now, or of employment, is advanced. Basically, if you're not advanced, meaning spending money on R&D and building a trained STEM-oriented workforce, you're not here.
But can I just build on, I think Mr. White is being really modest in this, and this is a really important point to make, not just in the area of manufacturing, but I think a larger point. Tako is a company, because of John's leadership, and his father and mother were the same, that has decided it's worth investing in the workforce. It recognizes the most valuable asset it has are the people who work at Tako. And it's not just education, it's childcare and art programs, and basically fully supportive of the workers there. As a result, he has a turnover rate which is teeny tiny, which is a good business outcome. But it's also a recognition as a business leader that this sort of sense of sharing in the prosperity of the company by ensuring that you attract the best talent and can keep it, so that as you're being required to innovate and be more efficient and produce more and come up with new ideas, you have a workforce that is both long-term but deeply invested in the work of the company and really highly skilled. It's a good reminder that model works in lots of other sectors, but we need business leaders and business owners who understand the value of valuing your workers, investing in your workers, and having a real culture of shared prosperity. It used to be, I think, sort of in the 60s and 50s and 60s and maybe even 70s, that was the business culture all across America. I would say that sadly that's more of an exception in a lot of places today than the rule, the Johnny Whites of the world. And I just think that it's a reminder that if we were to return to that kind of shared prosperity in the way we think about economic development and economic strategies to grow jobs, we would be more successful as a country, we'd be more prosperous, people would make better wages, and we'd be more productive and more competitive. So I just don't want to skip over that, because it's a big decision that Tako has made because of Johnny's leadership and his family's that makes a difference. And
well, I mean, that's a good point, and that raises a question, well, how do you get business leaders to do that if they're not required to? How do you solve that problem? Like, if that model works, how can you persuade business leaders to see that the same way, to invest in their workers, and that's a good business model? I don't know.
I mean, I think I ask John this question every time we talk about it. Like, why is it that more business owners, knowing the success that you have brought to Tako in using this model, why isn't it more prevalent? Why is it that there's so much focus on the value of a stock and
I think it's because most of them went to business school.
Because they went to business.
I didn't go to business school, right? And to me, as I said, and I don't say this lightly, a manufacturing company is the greatest creator of, manufacturing jobs are the greatest creator of wealth. There's no question about that. And it's a trickle down, right? So you have this thing called the net economic multiplier effect. Everybody know what that is? So every dollar I spend on building a product trickles out to, to suppliers and to, I don't know, fuel oil, whatever, to support the business. So it's a great creator of wealth, but it's also a social responsibility. And this is where businesses can go terribly, terribly wrong. They forget that these are human beings that make this machine go. These are not machines. These are not robots. And so to invest in them and their well-being, this has been my life. To invest in these people and their families because I love them. You see, this is another difference, right? A lot of these things are done for balance sheets and P&Ls, no question, and stockholders, and that's just too bad. But a private company like mine doesn't have to do that. So there is a difference, and some people are constrained by not being able to do the things we do because of these requirements. But I just think it's a whole lot of fun to run this business. I've never come to work and dreaded having to do anything because I've got a bunch of people to have fun with, and that's a difference in my outlook as to so many. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. So now I'm going to open up my questions to whichever one of the panelists wants to chime in. Feel free. So one of the things President Trump has done is he's been blamed globalization, free trade, on a lot of the loss of manufacturing jobs. And there is some truth to that. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, has been responsible for the shift of a lot of jobs to Mexico. And I'm wondering, what is the incentive? If it's that much cheaper to have a factory in Mexico where the labor is so cheap, what is the incentive for manufacturers to stay here in the United States?
I would say they have to have a climate and especially regional ecosystems that allow them to do something uniquely well in the United States that has higher value than it would be elsewhere. Actually, I think some of the pressures to offshore are easing a bit right now. In fact, the same kind of automation and productivity we're talking about is actually making the United States relatively more attractive than China. So there's, I think, an opening for creating, opportunities for U.S. Manufacturers, but they need to be able to do something here better than elsewhere. And it's not just about cheap, but it's about better. So there has to be, I think there are some advantages. U.S. software prowess is important, and we're beginning to see the emergence of very interesting small manufacturing startups that can do quite a lot because the workers are doing it all on laptop and, sort of outsourcing production and creating very creative small companies. So technology is an advantage. We need to have, very adept workers. We need to figure out a better way to do this training. And I think one of the concerns, is we probably need to be thinking, how do we make sure there are skilled, relevant workers in companies that aren't managed by John White? Right? I mean, I think there is a market failure a bit here, that companies don't feel they can invest in training enough because they don't capture the whole benefit of training that worker who might move on. So I think we are going to need some kind of incentives for companies to partner with community colleges and so on to train this workforce. And then we've got to make sure that we have that roster of great regional training, regional manufacturing centers. One of the concerns is that China is beginning to build these big ecosystems with, dense arrays of suppliers and skilled workers and so on. We have to make sure that we have multiple Silicon Valleys. Detroit actually is a very powerful manufacturing platform. I would say parts of Rhode Island have some of this, but we've got to have those places where you can put it all together and do it. And so I think we're going to, and some of this is going to require policy help. So.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is a couple of points. One is recognizing the quality of American-made goods is still a brand. Like people still around the world want to buy stuff made in America because it means a certain quality of the worker, a certain quality of the product. I think we should never forget that, and that's still a competitive advantage. We need to have a tax code that at least levels the playing field. It doesn't create an economic disadvantage for American manufacturers and reward people who, in fact, manufacture overseas, which our current tax code does. I mean, that, at least level the playing field. The idea that we incentivize companies to ship operations overseas under the tax code is, completely wrong. I also have a bill to fix that. The other thing is, I think recognizing why would we manufacture in the United States, the kind of existence of rule of law and the protection of intellectual property really matters. So that in advanced manufacturing and in new companies, they want to have confidence that what they're making can't be stolen. And if it's stolen, they can protect it. That doesn't exist in many other parts of the world. And I think, as Mark was saying, the regional economic hubs really matter because our competitors in this sector are starting to figure that out and developing very strong ecosystems, and we need to do that. And so I would say those are some reasons you'd want to do it here.
Can I just
go ahead, jump
pop in on this one quick? There are different reasons for moving around the world with manufacturing also. You can't discount. So at Tako, if you looked at my P&L, you would see that I don't chase cheap labor. I don't have manufacturing in Mexico and China and things, per se, because it wouldn't help me as much as the need to be able to buy at what I call worldwide material prices, which is a huge percentage of our cost base. So I'm concerned terribly, and I have been since the campaign, and I won't mention who I voted for, but you can probably guess, and I wouldn't mention it at the Brookings. But no, that still leaves it ambiguous, right? But I've been very concerned about the notion of tariffs and taxes on imports because we rely on materials. See, another reason so we own a foundry actually in Vietnam to manufacture stainless steel components because foundries have been regulated out of business in the United States. And that's okay because a lot of it's environmental and all. But we have to be able to buy material. So we've had to do some of that. So there are different reasons people go. One is to chase cheap labor, and one is to fulfill requirements. And that would be why we do some manufacturing outside of the country, not to just import at a low cost.
Yeah, so it sounds like what's more important to you then is like being able to import materials at an affordable price. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and so as a result of like free trade agreements, for example, like NAFTA, the federal government was trying to kind of mitigate, the labor, the effects on the workforce in the United States. And one of the programs was the trade adjustment program for displaced worker. And, it's gotten a lot of federal money to help workers displaced by NAFTA to, get more training, to switch to new careers. But, the research has been limited on how effective these training programs are actually. So I'm wondering, why is it so hard to help people switch careers, learn new skills? Is there something that these policies are missing? And I would love to get some thoughts on what could possibly be done to to fix the programs, or at least make them more effective.
Yeah, I could say just a couple things. So I think these programs, like trade adjustment assistance, which is the most worked out of all of these, what are called labor market adjustment programs, conceptualize transitions as sort of a one-time emergency, when in fact I think we need to be creating an atmosphere and supports for workers who will anticipate that they will need to retrain themselves or adjust themselves to disruptive trends multiple times. So we've acted as if loss of a job or an insecure job is a bug in the system, when it's actually, I think, a feature now. All of us will be at minimum, needing to retrain. Fortunately, if you work for Tako, you can do it with the company. But for many people, they're out of a job. And not only are they in trouble in their career, but they don't have the skills for the next job. So TAA represents, I think, a good recognition by, in this case, the federal government, that this will be that disruption will occur in association with trade. I think also tech also is now meaning that we need to take adjustment much more seriously. Sure. So I've been talking about the idea of, instead of viewing disruption and adjustment as one-time emergency for, say, your trade exposed company goes out of business, or your coal community loses the mine, right? Or your base closing, the base in your region closes. We should be thinking about this more holistically and try to. I call it a universal basic adjustment premium or something. So not the complete universal basic income, but something that people can know that is there, that would be meaningful, serious training, intelligence about where jobs are, which may not be in your immediate community, and maybe support for mobility. Maybe you need to move to Phoenix, which is, I think, part of the picture for some. And if you're of a certain age, maybe you do get an early retirement. But we should be thinking very boldly so people have the wherewithal to really weather and flourish in what is going to be, I think, a very dynamic economy in the next decade.
Yeah. And so, we've talked a lot about, we've here in this conference about automation and like the role and the impact on manufacturing, especially on the workforce. Technology is just going to keep advancing. It's just going to be becoming more productive, making it easier to do things that people once did. So why tell a kid, hey, you should, and don't go to college, go to manufacturing, if it really looks like the job prospects could be just shrinking and shrinking? Maybe I'm reading it wrong.
You're reading it wrong.
Okay.
I think, the attraction to young people and to people thinking about beginning a career is that this is an area of bold, exciting change. I mean, innovation and rapid changes in the development of manufacturing processes and new products is a place where so much is happening. And it's going to continue. I mean, it's very dynamic. And so, I think people used to think of manufacturing, as Johnny described it, kind of dark and dirty, and they would never want. I think people are starting to understand, no, actually, manufacturing is making stuff, and that is happening in very exciting ways in very different sectors, and is going to continue to be a rapidly changing thing, from driverless cars to on and on and on. So I think young people, particularly because of the maker movement, are starting to understand, like, this is actually a cool place to have a career. And it's a career where if you invest in yourself and you invest in your skills, you're going to see yourself move often and in exciting ways. I mean, I think to your earlier question, the challenge we have for a lot of the workforce that's been in manufacturing for a long time is just human nature. I mean, it used to be you would work for a manufacturer for your whole life, for your whole career, and then you would stop after 40 years or 30 years. And, if you say to someone who's been in manufacturing who's, 65 or 66, you have to go get new skills. They're like, I just want to keep working. That's just human nature, like to learn a whole bunch of new stuff or have to move your family at that stage of your career. Those are hard transitions. But I think, younger workers in this space who see how rapidly changing this is can easily understand that this is exciting. Your wages will be above non-manufacturing. It'll be very different and very dynamic. And so I think whether the net amount of jobs in that sector grows or not is a challenge. But I don't think it will be hard to say to people that there's a lot of exciting career opportunities in this sector.
And I would just add, it will be cooler if there's some kind of safety net or some kind of
that reduces the
base
risk,
so that you take a flyer on an incredible creative thing, it doesn't work out, you can retrain quickly and jump into something else. So it's more a sort of software like quick failure, quick success, and kind of, but it's going to be more like that, I think. And there's a reason, because so much of this stuff is now digital, you know, manufacturing companies being run out of, you know, laptops with 5 people running them.
So remember, to that point, that, you know, a person doesn't get to 66 and have to all of a sudden learn all this stuff, because if they've been in this job for 25 years, they've been learning it every day, right? So a lot of people have evolved. It's more a matter of, do those jobs remain, right? Or do they, or does the company go away, or somehow eliminate jobs? You know, people are learning every day, and I will attest again to the fact that people are absolutely not going to become obsolete. They are the one thing we all have that will grow and grow and grow.
Well, that brings me to my next question. Maybe you can answer it. I'm curious to find out the structure of your training programs, that what you've seen that works. I mean, are workers like in a classroom setting? What is it like? Are they spending part of their workday? Is it more like hands-on? I'm really curious. Like, people talk a lot about this workplace training, but it's kind of vague. Maybe you can give us more examples of, like, what does a good model look like?
Yeah, so really quickly, because there may be some questions, but we decided in the early 90s to create what was called the Tako Learning Center, which was because at that time we were just coming out of a recession, and we began to implement new equipment and automation, some productivity improvements. And we had a workforce which was still in a different era, essentially. So our choice was, Rhode Island was losing Brown and Sharp and Cleveland Twist Drill and all of these high-tech manufacturing companies. All these people were on the street. So our choice was to replace with available high-skilled workers or train. And my dad, and it's his legacy, I will say, is his greatest legacy, was to say, these are our people, let's keep them and train them. And he created the Tako Learning Center. And it involved gauge reading, blueprint reading, you know, CNC programming, English as a second language, job-related things. But what people did was, when they started to learn things, they wanted to learn more. And so we began to implement programs in business, you know, in accounting for the non-accounting types, you know, marketing for the non-marketing types, all of these. And eventually we were doing GED programs and citizenship programs, and eventually summer camps for the employees' children. And now we have up to and including an on-site MBA, and they're in our building. Okay, I just built a building in 2013 as a whole learning center facility, right? Because my people are worth the investment and the time and the care, and that's what it looks like.
And what's your turnover rate for your employees?
0.5%. Well, maybe a little more now. I don't know, but that's what it's been.
Right.
No, that's really fascinating. And I know that we're wrapping up here, so I want to open up the panel to questions from the audience. So if anyone has any questions, sir.
Frank Manheim, George Mason. Mr. White mentioned, I think, loss of foundries in the U.S., and that as a result he formed a company in Vietnam. How important was that loss of foundries, and what would it take to bring it back? What were the specific regulatory problems that affected the loss of foundries?
Mostly environmental. We're talking about the loss of foundries. I mentioned that before. Cast iron, steel, the steel business has suffered in this country too, and a lot of those regulations were environmental, you know, because that stuff is messy, you know. And I don't know how important it is to bring all that back. Maybe there's trade-offs that wouldn't be so great, but all as I can say is, and we actually didn't create the foundry in Vietnam. It came with an acquisition we did several years back, but it's turned out to be a great thing. And that, by the way, is a wonderful country. It's an interesting story, but wonderful country. And that little foundry functions just like my factory in Cranston, Rhode Island. It's clean, it's sweet. People are having learning programs. You know, it's an amazing place. But yeah, we've had to do that just because it's hard to buy that type of material in this country at a competitive price.
Any other questions over there?
Thank you, David Benowitz. People take it for granted that manufacturing jobs are well paid. But when you get down to it, it doesn't really take more skill to run a punch press than to run a word processor or even a vacuum cleaner. And I think historically, the reason manufacturing jobs have been well paid has been primarily labor unions. With the decline of the labor movement, is there any reason to expect manufacturing jobs to continue to be well paid? If you look in Asia, they're not well paid at all.
Who would like to answer that?
I could say so what's actually happening right now, you're both right and wrong, I think. What's happening is that there's a kind of polarization of or hollowing out of the wage distribution in companies. So you're actually seeing in many manufacturing companies relatively more engineering and higher skilled people, and then not so much in the middle, and then more lower wage people. I mean, I'm thinking now especially of, the hardcore, big, advanced manufacturing companies. So I think, you put your finger on something. There are, like everything else in America, there's a polarization occurring in which both is happening. But I think there are good jobs at the top, and then there are other jobs that can be okay, but are often paid less now. So
And just as a statistic, in 2015, the average manufacturing worker in the United States earned $81,289 annually, including pay and benefits. The average worker in all non-farm industries earned $63,830. So at least as of 2015, they're still significantly better wage. That is while there's a decline in union representation during that same period. So I think that increase has remained pretty consistent. It's something we should pay close attention to, though, if that's the point of the question, I think.
I think there was a question, yes, at the time.
One of the topics that was brought up was the issue of border adjustment tax and tariffs. Should that, considering that has been considered in the House, and which Mr. Sicily is a part of, like where do you think that is going, and how much of concern is it for a lot of people?
I think it's going nowhere. Is where it belongs.
That was a short and sweet answer. Any other questions over there?
Thank you, Lin Wang from East West Center. My question is for Mr. White. I'm interested in the demographic situation of your staff. What's the average age of your staff, and what's the percentage of them below 30 and over 50? And for your company, what's the critical challenge of your company for the further development? Thank you.
What was the last part of that question?
What's the critical challenge for your company now and the further development? Thank you.
Wow. If I had to answer the question about the average age, I don't know. Like me, right? Old. But that's because we all grew up together, right? As I said, these are the same people, and we all seem to start at about the same time. And so, but in seriousness, people are leaving, so we are seeing an influx of new, I want to say younger people, but they are, right? And so it's providing, I think, the ability to deal with what you ask is our biggest challenge, which is advancement in R&D, advancement in technology in terms of products, not just manufacturing, but also in manufacturing. So this new sort of influx of talent is bringing with it current mindsets, which are allowing us to expand in those areas. I tell you, there's nothing more important for a company's survival like mine than one, sales growth, and two, and not necessarily in this order, two, R&D and new product development, right? That's where profitability and growth comes from. So bringing new talent in that looks at things differently has been a great solution to what I've viewed as our biggest challenge.
Any other questions? Ma'am?
Good morning. My name is Rosemary Seguero. I'm a president of a company called Seguero's International Group. We focus on SMEs and manufacturing. Looking at manufacturing and how can we work with the students, young people from elementary, high school, college, to get the training enterprise like the chairmans are doing, and how do you make them understand that manufacturing can be also, they can also manufacture apart from being just employed. After getting to these colleges, they may come up as manufacturers. How do you deal with that? And how do you make them looking at working with the companies in summer? Let them go to companies that can work with them as interns in summer. And then eventually they can work with them so that they understand manufacturing is also a job is also can be manufacturing, just like agriculture. You can never convince young people to become to do agriculture because they think it's all that, just like manufacturing. But it can be beyond just being working as a manufacturer and in agriculture. So how do we make the young people understand that they can also manufacture by working with other companies? We should have such a, the government should consider that working with the small children up to high level, beyond STEM, innovation ideas, just in manufacturing. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. And, part of it is, I think schools, both, traditional public schools, career and technical schools, need to affirmatively engage in developing a manufacturing path so young people see that as a career opportunity and they're actually trained for the skills that they'll need to enter manufacturing. I think you're absolutely right. Apprenticeship and internship programs so young people can see what it means to be a manufacturer. Supporting, little things like 3D printing in school where everyone's a manufacturer so people start to understand that it's cool to make things. And then frankly, as a country, I think really disabusing ourselves of this notion, and I think we are finally getting there, that someone else is going to do manufacturing. We're going to be a service economy because it's dirty and it's dark and dangerous. And I think we did that for decades where we sort of suggested that this isn't something we should be focused on. It's not a good thing. Let somebody else do it. I think we recognize now to be a strong country and be a successful country, we need to make things, and the manufacturing sector is important to the future prosperity of America. And so just changing the way we, even some old people like me, talk about manufacturing to send messages to young people that it's an exciting opportunity, a great career. And finally, we have to stop telling every young person they're going to go to college. That if they want to go to college, it ought to be affordable and achievable, but we ought to honor and recognize the value of lots of other young people who want to do other things besides going to a four-year college that can have a very good career, make a good living, support themselves and their family, and we should applaud that and not make them feel like that's somehow less important or less in some way than someone who decides to go to a four-year college. That's my...
We've had this discussion, haven't we, over the years, right? And so I want to just add to this a little bit, which is simply, we have a luxury at Tako, which is that Rhode Island's a small place, and we've become a kind of a big fish in this little pond. But it's allowed us to do something very unique, and that is to create a community. Not just a company where people go to work, it's a community. So it involves the families. And what we found is that there's a bit of generational thing going on. We've got now second generation, which is the old way, right? Back in the great generation, fathers and sons followed one another to employment, and we see some of that at Tako, and even in our summer camps. We have these 4 summer camps, and they're 25 years old now, and we're seeing the kids of kids, coming to the camps, So it's a community, and I view that as a very heavy responsibility on my shoulders, is to create a community, support it.
There are questions in the back with the glasses.
Renee Matthew, I'm with the federal government. Thank you for a very interesting presentation, and Mr. White, I applaud your community orientation. I think that it's a lost art. I have 2 questions. One for Mr. White. I'm curious to know you must be a very profitable company to be able to offer the extensive community outreach and training that you do. Do you think that's unique? That's my first question. And the second question is for the congressman. I'm wondering if you could please give like 2 or 3 bullet points on your bill on revolutionizing the manufacturing sector. Thank you.
You go first and tell them how rich you are.
Well, you know, it's a very interesting point, actually, because when we started the Tako Learning Center, we were not far from broke. And it's why we did it. And we as a community and as a family have brought this company forward to a prosperous, winning machine. Is it as profitable as I would like to see it? I don't think anybody would say yes, right? But I'm going to say it's really well sustainable, and most importantly is providing back to the people. Oh no, there's no, no. No, listen, ma'am, I bang heads every single day of my life all over the world. But you know what this company has that no other company has? Us. They got me and these guys. And that's unbeatable. So that's the value added. No, that's why I talk about material price being so important. I compete every day all over the world. And it isn't easy. And it's getting tougher, you know, because people don't like me out there. I've learned that in my competitors. Right? So they don't let me just walk in and have fun with their accounts, let's say. Right? It's a challenge.
The Investing in Manufacturing Communities Partnership legislation essentially incentivizes communities to identify manufacturers, the people in the public sector, universities, community colleges, private sector businesses to work with local state governments to develop economic development strategies to support the manufacturing sector, to kind of really develop the ecosystems and then receive priority for federal funding to support the development of that manufacturing ecosystem. It's also bipartisan and bicameral. It's introduced in the House and the Senate by Republican and Democrat in both chambers. The bill number is, where's Ross Brennan? 4505, HR 4505. Thank you, Ross.
So we have time for one more question. I know there was a man with, yes, right there, who I had tried to call way in the back, sorry.
Thank you. My name is Harold Koster. I'm an independent consultant. I think we've drifted a little bit away from the title manufacturing under the Trump administration, and I want to bring the conversation back to that a little bit. And I want to go back to the environmental discussion that was touched upon briefly. And so my question is, I'm very mystified by the cheerfulness with which the Trump administration is gutting the environmental laws that we have in this country, and that people seem to applaud the disappearance of clean water, the disappearance of clean air. The people in West Virginia still can't drink water in Charleston, West Virginia, still can't drink water in Flint, Michigan, and yet their representatives are cheerfully voting constantly to gut these laws. So my question for anyone on the panel is, to what extent do the laws that we currently have in place really prevent growth of the manufacturing sector? What about the argument that people are making that green energy manufacturing is one of the fastest growing developing areas of the manufacturing economy? And is it worth it in the long run to destroy our environment to create jobs, more coal mining jobs, or other jobs on a very small scale that, to what extent does that help our economy and the well-being of our country?
Would you like to take that?
I'm happy to start. I agree with you. I'm not at all cheerful about the environmental degradation that is being proposed and the defunding of important environmental protections. I think it is both bad for us in terms of our well-being, and it's also bad for our economy in the long term. There's lots of examples around the world of why that's not good in the long term to not have clean air, clean water, clean energy. I think the argument about manufacturing in the green sector is exactly the right one. There's a huge growth in the development of green sector manufacturing jobs and a teeny tiny growth, if you can call it that, in coal jobs. And in fact, even if coal came back as a real source of energy, the coal jobs wouldn't. There was a great piece in the New York Times a few weeks ago about automation now that exists in the coal industry, so that even if we had a big increase in demand for coal, the number of jobs that would be created would be very, very small. So it's, not to mention the environmental consequences. So I think you're right. We hear a lot from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, in the House at least, that, the regulations are strangling business. And if it weren't for regulations, business would be able to grow even further. My view of it has always been, if there's a regulation that protects the public health, safety, and well-being, we ought to keep it in place. If it doesn't provide a useful purpose, we shouldn't have it. And in fact, despite what they say, President Obama repealed many more regulations than he ever gets credit for. We ought to have regulations that make sense, that are not overly onerous, that produce a result that's favorable. But the notion of wouldn't we be much better off if we had no regulations, that's been tried in some countries you can visit, and it's actually not such a great model for success in the short term or in the long term. So I think you're absolutely right. Please be assured that there's a whole group of us that are not cheerfully embracing any of this environmental degradation or accept the argument that that's a real impediment to job growth. And unfortunately, we're in the minority right now, but we're fighting hard to make our point.
Yeah, but also companies like mine, make no mistake, are investing millions and millions and millions of dollars in environmentally improving products, and some of which is because we're regulated by the DOE and whatnot. But it doesn't matter. We're going to do it anyway, because it's the right thing to do. Energy efficiency, it's a small thing, but my product line consumes 45% of the energy consumed in the United States of America, pumps and motors. So we have to improve that, and it's what we're doing. So a lot of money is being spent regardless of regulations.
Yep. I would just add, within reason, stringent regulation actually calls forth problem solving that can be extremely valuable in world markets. When you have clean energy technology right now is something like a $1.5 trillion global opportunity, and that's what is concerning about the U.S. not fully participating in the emergence and structuring of that business. It sounds like you're operating in global markets while problem solving for clean energy or clean solutions here. So I think that actually smart, stringent regulation is actually a competitive advantage for a lot of countries and a lot of firms.
Great. Well, thank you all. This is a lot to think about. And thank you all for joining us. And there's another panel if you want to stick around. But I want to thank our panelists for being here and contributing. So thank you all.